Session 2, Julian's 8th revelation. Walking towards pain. We talked about the 3 wounds that Julian asked for at the beginning of her life when she was a young girl. Before she asks for those 3 wounds of contrition, compassion, and longing for God, she asks for 2 other things. One is that she should die. She should come so close to death that she has all the last rites, and hopefully in that experience comes as close to God as she can. And the other is that she should experience in herself the pains of Christ's passion. Well, that first wish comes true when she becomes very, very ill, and she comes quite close to the point of death, which is where she is when she has her revelations. And the second comes true in the 8th revelation. So there she is, lying in bed. She's propped up by pillows for ease of breathing, she said. And there's the curate at the end of the bed with this crucifix, which, as I say, is about this big. So a decent size for her to see at the foot of her bed. And this is where her eyes are fixed and where the revelations take place. It's like an armature for the revelations. And the 8th revelation is the description of the Passion, the crucifixion, and it's true medieval style, pretty gory, but there is something about the way Julian describes it, I say, which is painterly. She doesn't dwell morbidly on the detail. She describes the detail for clarity, for perception, for detail, in order, as we have seen, for her to understand. Her understanding comes through her seeing. So she looks in more and more and more detail at this passion. And then she remembers this early wish. And she says, she's watching her beloved Lord in such intense pain. And the pain is all the more intense because he's God incarnate. So the spirits in him, she says, won't die. And he's drying up on the inside, and he's drying up on the outside because it's cold and the wind is blowing, and his skin is like tanned hide or dried wood, and it's peeling. I mean, it is pretty grim, and of course the blood is pouring down. And she says, okay, I want to feel this in myself. And she does. And it's the most terrible pain. It's worse than any pain she's ever known. And in the story I imagine for her, she has known the pain of childbirth, which for her was very hard. She says it's like the pain of the moment that her daughter Laura is born, but extended, not just a moment, but on and on and on. Howling and shrieking pain, and she regrets that she asks for it. I just wanted to read you, because this was such a lesson to me in my cancer treatment. Reflecting on this, in relation to my own experience. So I say, perhaps I really am a Christian after all. This book is full of me. I'm wondering whether I'm a Christian or not. Perhaps I really am a Christian after all. I find this unprotected revealing, this allowing, this suffering to be done unto of the crucifixion, the necessary passage to resurrection, the most powerful truth it is possible to be made known in this beautiful, chaotic, suffering, endlessly confounding world. Revelation of what we actually brokenly are is almost unbearably beautiful, and it stops me in my tracks, as many of your responses have, the ones in which you write so truthfully of yourselves. And whatever the resurrection is, because we pass through the crucifixion to realize it, it includes the crucifixion. Perhaps that is what Julian means when she writes, sin is behovely, because for Julian, sin is known only by the pain it causes. I resonate with Julian when she wishes to experience the pain of the Passion. I'm not writing here about some masochistic urge to be hurt, but rather the absolute revealing of the truth of myself, in extremis, nothing covered up. Her 8th revelation is of the last moments of Christ dying on the cross, and her encounter with him in this extreme state is so porous that her wish is granted, and she does indeed suffer the pains of the crucifixion. It is a pain worse than anything she has experienced or could have imagined before. A voice counsels her to look away from the cross and transfer her gaze straight up to heaven, but she refuses, understanding that she is looking at heaven already, in the bloody, disfigured face of the dying Christ, battered and destroyed by the world he revealed himself to without any protection. I just know that this is true. We have to go through the pain, or call it fear, not over it or around it, because resurrection is here, not elsewhere. So these passages here, we have this first passage. This is right at the beginning of the revelations. In the first revelation, she asks if she can have more light because the room is dark. And this is what she sees. It waxed as dark about me in the chamber as if it had been night, save in the image of the cross, wherein held a common light, and I wist not how. And she asks for more light, and she hears in her understanding that this is all the light that she needs, the light of the cross. And then later on, she's having the 8th revelation and experiences this pain herself. Then thought me, I knew full little what pain it was that I asked, and as a wretch I repented me, thinking if I had wist what it had been, Then thought me, I knew full little what pain it was that I asked, and as a wretch I repented me, thinking if I had wist, if I had known what it had been, loath me had been to have prayed it. For methought my pains passed any bodily death. Then I had a proffer in my reason, an offering in my reason, as it had been a friendly voice, said to me, look up to heaven, to his Father. Here me behoved to look up, or else to answer. I answered inwardly with all the might of my soul and said, nay, I may not, for thou art my heaven. So what I want to look at in this session, we've been wounded, and now we're going to enter through those wounds. And we're going to feel our way to the place inside ourselves that is ashamed, vulnerable, lost, fearful, in pain. Any one of those things. The place inside ourselves that we don't really like to show other people and don't really like to look at ourselves. And I want us to feel our way to that place and simply sit with it. Not try and get rid of it. So if you imagine you're with a dear friend, a beloved friend, and your friend is in a lot of pain, and there is nothing that you can do to relieve the pain, but you're not going to go away. And you sit with your friend until you are at ease, simply sitting with the discomfort, the pain, the fear. the anguish, the vulnerability, shame. This is our shadow self. There's a beautiful quotation from Rilke who says, "Our deepest fears are the dragons guarding our greatest treasures." Our deepest fears are the dragons guarding our greatest treasures. And the secret, as taught by St. Ignatius, is to go to that place of desolation, and there you will find consolation. Not by ignoring it, not by fighting it, not by running away from it, but by sitting with it. And creatives will say this shadow self is where their creativity often comes from. It's a strangely beautiful place, but you only do that when you go there. I might tell you that this is an exercise I do with public servants, many of whom are required to have a carapace, a public face, because they have to deliver to the public day after day after day, receive many abuses and criticism, some absolutely pitiless, and they still have to keep delivering. So you have a carapace, you have a public face. But if you don't look after the person who sits behind that carapace, it will bite you in the bum. And that is why we see some MPs doing unbelievably mad things, like looking at pornography in the chamber, or things you think, how can you possibly have thought that was all right? It comes from not looking after that often quivering wreck behind the face that looks like it knows what it's doing and looks confident and has all the answers, because that's what we demand, I'm afraid, of our leaders. And it's an unkind demand. It's the cost of democracy, and it's a very high cost. So we try and make this technique, of contemplative technique, available to give the chance to go behind the carapace, bravely go behind the carapace and go to this place and become at ease with it. And we do it with the contemplative technique, which I'll speak a bit more about in a moment. We also do it with comedy, a comedy workshop, where you make friends with your inner fool. The unedited voice is the voice of your inner fool. And again, for public servants, you can't speak without editing, because if you said what you really thought, you get into a lot of trouble. But of course, it, as well as being hilarious, it also tells the truth, as we know from Shakespeare's Fool. I discovered this because I did a stand-up comedy course quite a few years ago, and learned that if you're going to be a stand-up comedian, there's no point trying to be Miranda Hart or Frank Skinner or someone you think is funny. You have to find your own funny, and your own funny is your unedited voice. And then you discover all of your life is potential comedic material, and it's so liberating. I can't tell you. So we're not proposing to do that here, in case I haven't got the guy who would lead the workshop here. But this first half of this, it's a weekend on facing fallibility, is on this Ignatian technique. So I'm proposing that we should practice this in this meditation period. So if I just say a little bit more about how that might happen, and then please ask any questions, and hopefully it'll be possible to go away for a bit and just practice it. And be patient with yourselves. It's asking not just for bravery, but also focus. And of course, one's mind is always got lots of other things to be interested in, but you can regard the other things to be interested in as distractions that you're going to. So if you think of, that you're going to ignore. So if you think of the way so often on the internet, if you want something, you've got these adverts popping up endlessly either side of the text that you're trying to read. I was trying to read a bit of scripture online this morning, and there was advert, and so you had to hone in on the text and just not let that peripheral vision pull you away. hone in on the text and regard them almost as demons or fiends, as things that are going to try and take you away from the thing that you are intent upon, which is to go to your tender place and love it. This is an act of love. So find somewhere, anywhere where you can sit comfortably. You could do this as a walking meditation, but it's probably better to try and sit still. And probably close your eyes and just start a journey, an interior journey. Now, you might think of this as a walk. I'm doing this because it might go from your mind down into your heart, down into your belly. As you go, you might feel your way to where the pain is, and it might be somewhere in your body. It might be in your knee, somewhere in your body. It might be where there is actually some physical discomfort. And you just quietly go there. If you imagine you're in a dark room, and say you've woken up in a dark room, it's completely dark, and you have to find the wall with your hand and just feel your way along the wall until you find the door or the window or the light switch off. You feel your way along the wall. So we're moving into a place, an unknown place, a journey, an interior journey. Feel your way. And then when you get there, just try and stay there. And as I say, regard the distracting thoughts for this period as really unwelcome. They're really not needed. Sometimes they are, in this time, really not. You're going to persist to your place of desolation, as Ignatius calls it, and trust that by finding that place, consolation will emerge.